All right, what's going on, everybody? Happy Tuesday. Got a little bit more carving today. So I'm going to be talking about some square tips and some U-tips. And last week, carved a big bowl with some fine point tools and tried to cover all the little shapes and sizes that we have there. This will be a little bit different this time, where I'm going to be using a lot of the P tools. And so if you're new to the tools, we have a lot. We have a lot of tools. So what I've done is I've split out all of our straight bladed P tools of the square shapes and the U shapes here. A lot of the time when we have a workshop, I'll go through each type, and today I'll just be using the straight blades. And so for those that aren't super familiar with all the tools, the straight blades are they are a straight blade, so they don't have any sort of curve on a direction to them. They will go not as deep, so they're going to be very surface level, kind of shallow, and that's what I'll be using today. So let me adjust that. So same thing that I trimmed a few weeks ago. This is a B mix. It's leather hard right now. This was an underglaze that went on, and so it's a couple different colors that were blended together. All I want to do is take off the very surface of it, and so the best thing to do is use sort of these straight blade tools. I'm going to do this cup with all U-tips, and then I'm going to do this other bowl that I have with all square tips. And so I'll do kind of the same design, the same sort of it's just like some simple lines and stuff, and you'll really see the difference between square tips and U-tips, and how you can, I've mentioned this before, but you can do the same exact thing and they look completely different depending on what you use. So, and then also, this is one that I've got a little bit of a crack in the side, but that will glaze up okay on the inside, and so I'll just kind of carve through it. So if you see that, that's what's going on. I'm going to start with the P18. So this is a 6mm U-tip. It's a pretty standard size, and I'm just going to make some sort of random lines with it. You'll see it does not go very deep at all, and so all I'm trying to do is really scrape off that surface. And sometimes what's fun is just sort of making random shapes. And you'll see here what makes a big difference is if you want like the beginning or end to be U-shaped. It's pretty easy to just push sort of straight in with a U-tip, and it'll do that. And so unlike last time where it was kind of set up with spacing going around, this time I'm just going to sort of make all these short little lines. And you'll notice, kind of depending on how much pressure you apply, you will get a little bit of line width. And so that's probably the hardest part about a lot of the P tools and really any of the carving is practicing with how much pressure you're using on the tool. This clay I actually had sitting in a little damp box, and it's a little bit softer than what I would normally carve with, and so it's sort of carving away a lot easier, and you have to kind of recalibrate your hand. The reason I'm using straight blades too on this is a lot of the time the curved blades, they go a lot deeper than what you think. And so if you like sort of that more surface level, straight blades aren't going to sink that deep. The walls on this are probably a little too thin for a curved blade. So this will work out. And I'm just going all the way around first with this one. And so another thing with something like the U-tips is if, I'm using the actual U shape of the tool to make that U-shaped groove. If you're carving and you just kind of break away, you're gonna end up with a lot flatter edge. And so a lot of time I'll come back and create like an actual U-shaped end to each line that way. Okay, so that's the P18, and kind of all I did is do some like general, like really basic blobs all over. And then what's fun is that's a 6mm U. We have the P17, which is a 3mm U, and the P16, which is a 1mm U. And what those numbers really kind of represent is if you had a little circle at the very tip of the blade, it's the diameter of that circle. So naturally, each of those blades becomes a little bit wider as it is bolted onto the handle, but it's that very tip, that very end sort of diameter of that circle. So that's where the 3 and the 1 come from. We do have a larger, this is the 12mm. This cup's just a little small for that, and so I'm gonna do more with the 3 and the 1 here. And so I'm just gonna come back and add some real little details. I'm just kind of doing the same thing where I'm sort of carving these short little lines. And then anywhere there is like a sharp corner, I'm just rounding it out a tiny bit, not much. Just kind of like that. And so the larger tool sort of broke up, everything, and then this one is nice to come through and just kind of add some little zigzags here and there. So in this area that had a little crack in it, I'm just going to be delicate with it. We'll go right over the top. And since I'm not going that deep, the lines you're left with are really approximately that like 3 millimeter width. You have to account a little bit for shrinkage after. And what's tricky about the U-tip blades is a lot of people kind of will sink in, the straight blades. You can always carve deeper with the straight blades, but you don't have as much control as the curved bladed tools. So they're really good for this kind of surface level. You're not going very deep, and you can have quite a bit of control just on the surface. Through it, and you'll see some of these areas I'm leaving a little bit more color. That'll come back with that extra small tool and make a few more little designs. And so because I'm using the U-tip, just sort of keep in mind like everything I'm naturally, or like it's sort of easy to make it look very bubbly, sort of organic, curvy, squiggly. A lot of that comes from just the tool itself. Any of these little, again, sharp little corners, I just sort of nick that corner, and it makes it look a little bit more rounded. And you'll see when I do the square tips, it won't have that effect, so it'll look a lot sharper. And so what's fun about these kind of designs is you're just sort of filling in the space. It feels like you're not really following a pattern or trying to, repeat something all the way around. It's kind of like doodling, but on the side of something. back to the beginning. All right, and then I'll end this one. This is the P16, so it's even smaller, so it's what we'd call a 1 millimeter U. You can tell a little bit of the difference there. When you get this small, a lot of the time you have to keep in mind, if you just sink that blade in, it's gonna get wider because it's bolted on the same handle. So all these really small tools, if you really want that tiny effect, is you're just being delicate with it. You're not going very deep at all. So a lot of these, I'm just gonna make a little line, just like that. Anywhere that there's like a little bit thicker area, you can add a little blob or whatever you want to call it. And you could say this is kind of getting into the fine point realm. We do have, similar sizes on the fine point tools. And when someone asks, difference between fine point, like a small one of these, the fine points are a lot more maneuverable, side to side, turning. They're like agility scores higher, if you want to call it that. These blades are much wider compared to fine point, and so I'd say they're not as maneuverable, but they're really good at just kind of doing basic straight lines, sort of designs like this. And then anywhere there's just a little bit of a, full spot, I like to just add a little something. So just a little zigzag like that. And we're almost there. Okay, so we'll leave this one like that. So you can tell it's just using U-tips. All the little corners, all the insides, everything's rounded. Looks very sort of bubbly, organic, maybe alien-like. So now I'm going to do the same type of thing, but just using the square tip tools. Empty that. So for this one, I have a little bit larger bowl. So this is one that I threw a few weeks ago. And so I'm gonna start with the P24. So it's kind of the same size, it's a 6mm square tip. And all of these sizes refer to the length of that top flat piece. So we have the P24, P19, and the P20. Now, what's cool about the square tips is you don't have to do a lot of cleanup after. And what I have to keep in mind on this bowl is just sort of how I'm holding it. So these are going to make crisp, square, right angles, really clean edges. And this bowl's a little bit drier, which I do like. The tool doesn't, it's really just scraping that outer surface, so it's not gonna go as deep, and you do have a little bit more control. So I'm just starting with these big chunks going around. And it doesn't mean you have to do straight lines, you can do curved. And you can tell already it looks a lot different, keeping all these sharp corners and right angles. You just get a much different effect. And again, doesn't really matter what I'm doing, just kind of doodling on here. And then anywhere it looks like there's something you gotta just square up, it's pretty easy. All I do is just use that blade and just barely push it in to clean up an edge. All right, so that's the P24. And you can see everything that was done with that. The P19 is our 3mm straight blade square. So this is the next size down. Question, how do you smooth rough bits in cuts? If I'm understanding correctly, if you're asking about like if the edge is rough, sometimes I'll just have to go over it again and go a little bit wider. So that sort of happened here, where one of the edges was kind of rough, or like you slipped a little bit. It's tough. You can go in and try to like barely scrape away at it to clean it up, but then it might look a little wonky. And so sometimes I'll just go over it again, but make the whole line a little bit wider. It's tricky. A lot of that depends on kind of the dryness of the clay that you're using, and the slip and or underglaze. And so I'm doing the same thing that I did back there, but just with this smaller tool, and coming in anywhere there's sort of room for it, I'm going to add a little carving. And what goes quicker about some of the square tips is you don't have to go around some of those edges or sort of fine-tune things. They really just sort of do it by themselves. And the more you kind of doodle like this, the more you start to like kind of leave things spaced right for the next tool down. Like some of these areas, they just sort of fit in there. Right here, works out to just make a groove there. But at the end, all you're doing is just sort of doodling what makes sense. almost back around, a couple more little areas. Alrighty. So the last bit of this one is going to be with the P21. This is the smallest little square we have. So this one's cool. We take a lot of sort of time and effort to make sure that is a very small little square. Because we don't want it to look like the P16, that U shape, and we want to make sure to maintain like any sort of these right angles, the edges and everything. They got to stay square, and so that's where the P21 comes in. I'm gonna go back around one more time, and anywhere it looks like we could fit a little line in, we'll add. And this one's a little bit less sensitive to having to come back and like carve both directions, just because it will leave a pretty nice square on each end of what you're doing. Whereas with the U-tip, sometimes you have to come back from the other direction and make sure the end of what you're carving is a nice U shape. This one usually will leave it that way. So sometimes in these really small areas, I will just add like tiny little lines. And then you end up with these really thin parts of color. So when this gets a clear coat, it'll look like you just have these little slivers of color that sort of zigzag around like a maze. Here we go. So that's that. I'll finish this later. Usually do the bottom, and so here we'll leave this one like that. So just to compare, this one you can tell really has like sharp corners, right angles. All it was just sort of doodling, compared to like a U-tip where you really get a lot more of like these bubbly, organic, curved shapes. And so that's the difference of just, it's the same type of doodle, the same type of little design. One's a square tip, one's a U-tip. And so it's fun to sort of mess around with that. And then I did 3 main sizes, so it's like that 6 millimeter size, the 3 and the 1 for each. So it's a pretty good comparison of the P tools, the square tips, and the U tips. We'll tag the tools in here if you want to take a look after. And then next week we'll come up with something good again. So we're almost to August. Keep that in mind. We're trying to keep this summer going as long as possible. One quick little update is we do have another double-sided tool. So this was we made this, based on the popularity of the P1 X1. This is the P2 X2. So very different from the P1 X1. This is going to be a U-tip sort of double-sided tool. The P2 is a 2 millimeter U-tip. It's curved, so it's going to go a lot deeper. You're going to get kind of deeper grooves. You're going to have more control over them. They'll be a lot more even that way. The X2 is a large U-tip fluting tool. So this one you're going to get very nice burnished edges on either side of the groove, whereas the P tool side here are going to be nice square sharp edges on either side. So check that out online if you're a fan. Otherwise, thanks for joining, and we'll leave her there, and have a good rest of your week.